The final tally for the office funeral collection was $0.00, but by the time Eleanor Vance's will was read, that zero would cost them millions. Clara stood in the gleaming, impersonal lobby of Sterling Corp, a small cardboard box clutched in her hands. It contained the last vestiges of her aunt's 30-year career. A chipped ceramic mug with a faded picture of a cat, a well-worn cardigan draped over the back of her chair, and a single framed photo of Clara herself as a child. It felt impossibly light, a testament to a life that had left almost no physical impression on this place. She had called ahead, a courtesy her aunt would have insisted upon. A woman with a voice as sharp and sterile as the lobby's decor had told her to come after 5 when the office was clear. Clara understood. They didn't want the unpleasantness of death intruding on the business of making money. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a floor of polished concrete and glass-walled offices. It was mostly empty, as promised, save for 2 figures standing near the reception desk. A man, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her aunt's car, was laughing. The woman beside him, whose blonde hair was pulled into a severe, architectural bun, smirked. Clara recognized them from the one time she'd visited her aunt for lunch years ago. Marcus Thorne, the department head, and Brenda, his executive assistant, a woman who seemed to wield her position like a weapon. She approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt, but their voices carried in the cavernous, empty space. "So, the grand total for the Eleanor Vance Memorial Fund?" Marcus asked, his tone dripping with amused contempt. Brenda let out a short, ugly laugh. "A big, fat 0. I sent the email. I even put the little collection envelope on the front desk. Not a single person put $1 in. Can't say I'm surprised." Clara froze, her hand tightening on the box. Her heart felt like a cold, heavy stone in her chest. "Well, it's a bit sad, I suppose," Marcus said, though he didn't sound sad at all. He sounded bored. "But what can you do? She was here for 30 years, and I don't think I ever had a single conversation with her that wasn't about spreadsheets. Why would we chip in for a funeral?" Brenda's voice was the final, twisting blade. "Honestly, what would be the point? People like her are a dime a dozen. She was basically charity, keeping her on for all those years." That was it. That was the phrase that would echo. A dime a dozen. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She saw her aunt's kind, wrinkled face in her mind's eye, the way she'd listened patiently to Clara's trivial problems, the way her hands, gnarled with arthritis, would carefully tend the small rose bush on her balcony. They hadn't seen her. They hadn't seen her at all. Clara took a deep, shaky breath, forcing her feet to move forward. She had to get the box. She had to get out. The 2 of them finally noticed her as she reached her aunt's old cubicle, a small gray box in a sea of identical gray boxes. "Oh," Brenda said, her voice shifting to one of feigned sympathy. "You must be the niece. I'm so sorry for your loss." Her eyes were cold, assessing Clara's simple coat and worn boots with a flicker of disdain. "We were all so fond of Eleanor," Marcus added, his smile not reaching his eyes. "A fixture in the office. Truly, it won't be the same without her." The lies were so thick, Clara felt like she might choke on them. She said nothing. She couldn't trust her voice. She simply walked to the cubicle, placed the few items from the desk into the box, and turned to leave. The cardigan smelled faintly of her aunt's lavender soap. The scent brought a fresh wave of grief, so sharp it was almost a physical blow. She kept her head down, her silence a shield. She didn't want them to see the tears welling in her eyes. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction. Her restraint felt like a lead weight in her stomach. But she knew, with a certainty that was both chilling and clarifying, that this was not the time or place for her anger. Her aunt had taught her better. "If you need anything," Marcus called after her, his voice echoing with false sincerity, "don't hesitate to reach out." Clara didn't look back. She walked past them, through the lobby, and out into the cold night air. The city lights blurred through her tears. She sat in her car for a long time, the cardboard box on the passenger seat like a silent accusation. They had not only disrespected her aunt in death, they had erased her in life, reducing a woman of quiet dignity and profound intelligence to a balance sheet, a charity case. But they had made a fatal mistake. They thought Eleanor Vance had nothing. They couldn't have been more wrong. Back in her aunt's small, meticulously tidy apartment, Clara made a cup of tea, her hands still trembling. The place was filled with books and plants, not expensive furniture or flashy art. It was the home of a person who valued substance over style, a philosophy that had guided Eleanor's entire existence. On the coffee table was a worn, leather-bound book. It wasn't a diary, not exactly. Her aunt had called it her ledger of human accounts. Clara had seen it many times, but had never looked inside. A small, sealed envelope was tucked under its cover, with Clara's name written in her aunt's elegant, looping script. With a sense of dread and purpose, she opened it. The letter was short. "My dearest Clara," it began. "If you are reading this, then my time has come. Do not mourn too long for me. I have lived a full life on my own terms. Inside the ledger, you will find my final accounting. My lawyer, Mr. Alistair Finch, has the corresponding instructions. He will contact you. Remember what I always told you. People show you who they truly are when they think you have nothing to offer. I was watching, always." Her aunt's words settled over her, a calm in the storm of her grief. "I was watching." Clara opened the ledger. The first page was a simple dedication. For those who saw a person, not a function. The pages were filled with her aunt's precise handwriting. Entries dated over 30 years. On the left side of each page were names under the heading, Credits. On the right, under Debits. It was a meticulous record of every small interaction at Sterling Corp. Under Credits, she saw names she didn't recognize. June 12, 1998. Javier, the night security guard, held the elevator for me when he saw me rushing. He always asks about my roses. May 4th, 2005. Maria, from the cleaning crew, shared her sandwich with me when I forgot my lunch. We talked about her daughter's graduation. September 22nd, 2017. Ben Carter, a new analyst, helped me pick up my files when I dropped them in the hall. He didn't have to. Everyone else just walked around me. The entries were small, seemingly insignificant acts of kindness that her aunt had recorded and cherished. Then her eyes drifted to the debits column. It was much, much longer. Page after page listed names she knew. Marcus Thorne, Brenda, the CEO, Mr. Sterling himself. March 15th, 2001. Marcus Thorne took credit for my quarterly report analysis in the department meeting. Smiled at me right after as if we were co-conspirators. July 30th, 2010. Brenda lost my vacation request form. I missed my flight to see you, Clara. She said it was my fault for not following up. December 20th, 2019. Annual holiday party. Mr. Sterling walked past me to shake hands with every senior manager. He looked right through me. For 30 years, he has looked right through me. The final entry was dated just 2 months before her death. January 14th. Brenda speaking to Marcus when she thought I was out of earshot. "I don't know why we keep her on. My nephew could do her job in half the time. She's just dead weight." Clara closed the book, a cold, hard anger solidifying in her heart. This wasn't just a diary. It was evidence. It was a weapon, forged over 3 decades of quiet observation and silent endurance. Her aunt hadn't been a victim. She had been a judge, presiding over a 30-year trial, and the verdict was about to be read. The next morning, as promised, Mr. Alistair Finch called. His voice was warm and kind, a stark contrast to the brittle tones of the people at Sterling Corp. He asked Clara to come to his office that afternoon, a stately old building downtown that spoke of old money and even older principles. When Clara arrived, Alistair, a man in his late 70s with a shock of white hair and gentle eyes, greeted her personally. He led her into a wood-paneled office, lined with books from floor to ceiling. He poured her a glass of water and sat opposite her in a worn leather armchair. "Your aunt," he began, his voice soft with genuine sadness, "was one of the most remarkable women I have ever had the privilege of knowing, and one of the most underestimated." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "She told me about your visit to her office," he said, his eyes full of sympathy. "She anticipated their behavior. In fact, she counted on it." This surprised her. "What do you mean?" "Eleanor was not just a client, Clara. She was a dear friend, and she was, for lack of a better word, a genius." He slid a thick portfolio across the polished desk. "I am the executor of her estate. I think it's time you understood the full picture." Clara opened the portfolio. The first page was a summary of assets. She stared at the number at the bottom of the page, her mind refusing to process it. She read it once, then twice. The string of zeros seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Hundreds of millions of dollars. "How?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She lived in that tiny apartment. She drove a 15-year-old car. She worked in a cubicle for less than $60,000 a year. Alistair smiled. Because Eleanor Vance had discovered a secret very few people ever do. She knew the difference between being rich and being wealthy. She had no interest in being rich. But she was, indeed, very, very wealthy. He then told her the story. When Eleanor was just a young woman in her 20s, long before she started at Sterling Corp, she had been a brilliant but uncredited programmer. She developed a small, elegant piece of data compression algorithm. It was revolutionary, but she didn't have the resources to market it. A fledgling tech company bought the patent from her for a pittance, a few $1,000s up front. "But your aunt was clever," Alistair explained. "She insisted on a small clause in the contract, one they almost laughed at. She asked for a fraction of a percentage of the royalties from any software that used her code. 0.01%. That tech company was now one of the biggest software giants in the world. Her algorithm was embedded in nearly every piece of software they had sold for the past 40 years. That tiny, laughable fraction of a percent had become a torrent of passive income, compounding year after year, managed quietly and expertly by Alistair's firm. She took the job at Sterling Corp to have a routine, a purpose, he continued. But more than that, she saw it as a social experiment. She wanted to see how people would treat her when they thought she was nobody. She wanted to be valued for her mind and her character, not her bank account. Clara thought of the ledger, the 30 years of meticulous notes. It all made a terrible, brilliant kind of sense. Her aunt hadn't been hiding. She had been observing, gathering data for her final, great project. "And now," Alistair said, leaning forward, "we come to her final instructions, the will." He pulled out another document, sealed with wax. "Eleanor was very specific. She has left the bulk of her estate to you and to a series of charitable trusts dedicated to education and animal welfare." He paused, a glint in his eye. "However, she set aside a significant portion, $50 million, for what she termed the Sterling Corp legacy bequest." Clara's heart began to beat faster. According to the terms of the will, Alistair went on, she wanted to reward the work family that sustained her for 3 decades. The bequest is to be distributed among her colleagues at her former place of employment. Clara stared at him, confused. But after how they treated her? After everything she wrote in the ledger? Ah, Alistair said, a slow smile spreading across his face. That is the genius of it. The will stipulates that the distribution is subject to a specific condition. It is to be awarded only to individuals who have demonstrated, and I quote, consistent and genuine human decency, the evidence for which is to be found exclusively within her personal ledger. The trap was sprung. It was elegant, cruel, and perfectly just. She wanted them all there, Alistair said. She wanted a formal reading. She wanted them to see what they had lost. Not just the money, but the chance to have known the remarkable woman who sat in the gray cubicle they ignored for 30 years. Over the next week, Clara and Alistair planned the execution of Eleanor's final act. The first step was the invitation. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind of thing that signaled importance and money. It was sent by courier to the senior management of Sterling Corp, including Marcus Thorne, Brenda, and the CEO. The invitation was a masterpiece of misdirection. It formally requested their presence at the law offices of Finch, Covington, and Stowe for a special reading concerning a provision in the last will and testament of their former employee, Eleanor Vance. It mentioned a substantial bequest left to honor her colleagues. The bait was set. Now, they just had to wait for the fish to bite. It didn't take long. News of the invitation spread through Sterling Corp like wildfire. A junior employee named Ben Carter, the same young man who had helped Eleanor with her dropped files, had always been fond of her. He despised the office culture and had exchanged occasional friendly emails with Clara after her aunt's passing, offering his condolences. He became her unwitting source on the inside. Ben told her the office was buzzing. The initial disbelief had quickly morphed into unbridled greed. No one could fathom why quiet, mousy Eleanor would have any money to leave, but the name of the prestigious law firm lent the invitation an undeniable gravity. The narrative began to shift almost immediately. Suddenly, everyone remembered Eleanor with a deep, abiding fondness. Marcus Thorne was the most vocal. He gathered his team for an impromptu meeting, his voice thick with counterfeit emotion. I always knew there was something special about Eleanor, he declared, pacing in front of the glass wall of his office. She was the soul of this department, so dedicated, so loyal. I like to think that in my own way, I was a mentor to her. She clearly appreciated the opportunity I gave her here. Ben reported that Brenda was even more transparent. She was overheard on the phone with her mother, her voice shrill with excitement. Yes, millions! Can you believe it? The old dear must have had a secret nest egg. I was always so good to her, you know. I always made sure her paperwork was prioritized. I'm thinking a new convertible. A BMW, maybe? I deserve a little something for all the years I had to deal with her. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Clara read Ben's emails with a mixture of disgust and grim satisfaction. They were walking deeper and deeper into the trap, their greed blinding them to the absurdity of their own claims. They were so busy rewriting history that they never stopped to ask themselves the most important question: why? They began to speculate on the amount. Substantial bequest was a tantalizingly vague phrase. It started as rumors of a few $100,000, but with each retelling, the number grew. By the end of the week, the consensus was that the reclusive old woman had been sitting on a secret family fortune and was leaving the entire company millions. Their behavior toward Clara changed too. Marcus called her personally. His voice, once dismissive, was now oozing with a syrupy, solicitous charm. "Clara, my dear," he began. "I was just thinking about your aunt and how proud she must be of you. We are all so looking forward to honoring her memory at the reading. She was a gem, an absolute gem." Clara played her part, keeping her voice quiet and non-committal. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne. It's very unexpected." "Not at all, not at all," he boomed. "She was a woman of great character. It's no surprise she would be so generous in the end." Brenda sent her a grotesquely large flower arrangement with a card that read, "Thinking of you in this difficult time. Your aunt was an inspiration to us all." Clara put it directly in the trash. The final insult, the last act of posthumous cruelty, came 2 days before the reading. The company announced it would be dedicating a new wellness room in Eleanor's name. It was a small, windowless office they had previously used for storage. They sent out a press release, patting themselves on the back for their corporate compassion. They were using her memory as a PR stunt to celebrate the money they were about to receive. Reading the press release, any lingering shred of doubt or guilt Clara might have felt vanished. These people were not just unkind, they were parasites. They deserved what was coming. They had earned it, one small cruelty at a time, over 30 long years. She spent the day before the reading with Alistair, going over the final details. The boardroom was prepared. Copies of the relevant ledger pages were made. A separate room was set up for the 3 true beneficiaries, who had been contacted privately and told only that they were named in a will and their presence was requested. They had no idea what was waiting for them. "Are you ready for this?" Alistair asked her gently, seeing the tension in her shoulders. Clara looked at the worn leather ledger sitting on his desk. She thought of her aunt's quiet strength, her unwavering sense of justice. "She was ready?" Clara said, her voice firm. "So I am too." The day of the reading was gray and overcast, a fitting backdrop for the drama about to unfold. The boardroom at Finch, Covington, and Stowe was an intimidating space, designed to convey power and history. A long mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, dominated the room. Portraits of stern-faced men, presumably the firm's founders, stared down from the walls. Clara arrived early with Alistair. She chose a simple, dark dress, wanting to appear as unassuming as possible. She was the ghost at this feast, a quiet observer. The Sterling Corp contingent arrived in a flurry of expensive perfume and loud chatter. There were about 15 of them in total, the entire senior management team. Marcus and Brenda led the pack, their faces flushed with anticipation. They were all dressed in their finest clothes, as if attending a gala. Marcus spotted Clara and strode over, his hand outstretched. "Clara, so good to see you. You're looking well, all things considered." He patted her shoulder with a condescending familiarity. "Your aunt was a simple woman, but she knew her place. We're so glad she remembered us in such a grand fashion." Brenda offered a tight reptilian smile. "We're all just one big family after all," she said, her eyes scanning the opulent room with a greedy gleam. Clara simply nodded, murmuring a quiet, "Thank you for coming." Her calmness seemed to unnerve them slightly. They expected tears, gratitude, a reflection of their own feigned emotions. Her quiet composure was not part of their script. They took their seats around the massive table, their excited whispers filling the room. At the far end of the room, near the door, sat 3 other people, looking bewildered and out of place. Javier, the security guard, in his crisp uniform. Maria, from the cleaning crew, clutching her handbag in her lap. And Ben Carter, the young analyst, looking nervous and confused as to why he'd been summoned. The senior managers barely gave them a glance, dismissing them as part of the law firm's staff. Alistair entered the room, and a hush fell. He took his place at the head of the table, his presence commanding immediate respect. Clara sat at his side, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Eleanor's ledger was on the table in front of him. "Good afternoon," Alistair began, his voice calm and steady. "We are gathered here today for a reading from the last will and testament of Ms. Eleanor Vance." He put on a pair of reading glasses and began to read through the legal boilerplate, his voice a low, steady drone. Clara watched the faces of the Sterling Corp team. They were practically vibrating with impatience, their eyes fixed on Alistair, waiting for the number. "Now," Alistair said, looking up from the document, "we come to Article 4, the provision Ms. Vance titled, The Sterling Corp Legacy Bequest." A collective intake of breath. This was it. "I quote," Alistair said, his eyes sweeping the room. "Having spent 3 decades of my professional life in the employ of Sterling Corp, I feel it is only fitting to acknowledge the profound impact the company and its people have had on me. To that end, I have set aside a sum of $50 million." A wave of audible gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. 50 million. It was more than they had even dared to dream. Brenda's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Marcus looked like he had just won the lottery, a broad, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. He caught Clara's eye and gave her a slight, condescending wink, as if to say, "See? I told you she appreciated me." Alistair held up a hand for silence. "A sum of $50 million, he repeated, letting the weight of the number settle in the room, "to be distributed among my colleagues." The room was electric with greed, but Alistair hadn't finished. "However," he continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge, "this bequest is subject to a single, non-negotiable condition." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "The funds are to be distributed, and I quote again, only to those individuals who, during my tenure, demonstrated consistent and genuine human decency toward me, a person they believed to be of no consequence or influence." The smiles around the table faltered. A flicker of confusion appeared on Marcus's face. "Ms. Vance, being a woman of meticulous detail," Alistair went on, his hand resting on the leather-bound book, "maintained a private ledger for the duration of her employment. This ledger, and this ledger alone, will serve as the sole determinant of eligibility for this bequest." He opened the book. The silence in the room was now heavy, laced with a dawning sense of dread. "Ms. Vance divided her colleagues into 2 lists," Alistair explained, his voice now cold as ice. "We will begin with the list of beneficiaries." He looked toward the 3 quiet figures at the end of the room. "Mr. Javier Morales." Javier, the security guard, looked up, startled. "Eleanor writes," Alistair read from the page, "for 30 years, Javier never failed to greet me by name. He held the door. He asked about my day. He treated me with the same respect he showed the CEO. He saw a person, not a uniform or a title. To Mr. Morales, Eleanor Vance leaves the sum of $1 million. Javier's jaw dropped. He stared, speechless, as Maria, sitting beside him, gasped and put a hand on his arm. "Ms. Maria Flores," Alistair continued, turning to the cleaning woman. Maria began to tremble, her eyes filling with tears. "Maria has a difficult job, and many treat her as if she is invisible. But she was never invisible to me, nor I to her. She once shared her lunch with me when I had none. A simple act of kindness I never forgot. To Miss Flores, Eleanor Vance leaves the sum of $1 million. Maria let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. "And Mr. Benjamin Carter," Alistair said, his gaze finding the young analyst. Ben's face was pale with shock. "Me?" he mouthed. The young people at the firm are often in too much of a hurry to notice anyone. But Ben was different. He saw me drop a box of files, a clumsy old woman in the way. He stopped, he helped, and he smiled a genuine smile. It was a small thing, but it was everything. To Mr. Carter, Eleanor Vance leaves the sum of $1 million. Ben just shook his head in disbelief, tears streaming down his face. The three of them, the forgotten people, the ones who were truly invisible in the corporate hierarchy, were now millionaires. Alistair closed the ledger slowly. He looked at the stunned, silent faces of the senior managers. Their greedy smiles had been replaced by masks of disbelief and fury. "That concludes the list of beneficiaries," Alistair announced into the dead silence. Marcus Thorne finally found his voice. It was hoarse with rage. "What is this? A joke? What about the rest of us? What about the $50 million? Alistair fixed him with a glacial stare. "The bequest was for $50 million, Mr. Thorne. $3 million has been distributed. The remaining $47 million, per Miss Vance's instructions, will be used to establish a charitable foundation in her name, dedicated to promoting workplace dignity." He then picked up a single sheet of paper. It was a letter from Eleanor, her final word. "For the remainder of my colleagues," Alistair read, his voice resonating with all the power of Eleanor's final judgment. "I leave them exactly what they contributed to my life in its final moments. Nothing." The word hung in the air, a death knell to their avarice. Alistair's eyes then moved from Marcus and landed directly on Brenda, whose face had gone a ghastly shade of white. He read the final lines from Eleanor's letter, the words Clara now knew by heart. "I have learned that some people are, as you so aptly put it, a dime a dozen. Their character, it seems, is worth even less. You saw me as charity. I see your greed as a liability I will not fund." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than any sound, a crushing weight of public humiliation. You could hear a pin drop on the plush carpet. The smug, confident executives of Sterling Corp sat frozen, their faces a tableau of shock, fury, and utter disgrace. Marcus was the first to break. He slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "This is insane, preposterous. She was a senile old woman. This is a fabrication. We'll sue. We'll sue you. We'll sue the estate." Brenda started to sob, not with grief, but with the pathetic, ugly tears of a thwarted child. "I can't believe this," she whimpered. "How could she do this to us?" Alistair remained perfectly calm. "I assure you, Mr. Thorne, the will is ironclad. Ms. Vance was of perfectly sound mind, and her instructions are legally binding. As for evidence..." He slid a small stack of photocopied pages from the ledger across the polished table. They fanned out in front of Marcus. Marcus stared down at the pages. He saw his own name again and again. He saw his own cruel words, his dismissive actions, all recorded in Eleanor's elegant script, dated and detailed with devastating accuracy. He saw the note about him taking credit for her report. He saw a dozen other small, forgotten cruelties, now resurrected as his public indictment. His face went from red to white. He looked up, his eyes wild, and saw that everyone at the table was staring at him. His authority, his carefully constructed image of a powerful executive, had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. "Get out," Alistair said, his voice quiet but carrying the force of a command. "All of you. The proceedings are concluded." For a moment, nobody moved. Then, as if a spell had been broken, there was a scramble of chairs, a frantic gathering of briefcases and purses. They couldn't get out of the room fast enough. They didn't look at each other. They didn't look at Clara. They fled, their faces etched with a humiliation that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Marcus was the last to leave. He stood, his suit suddenly looking too big for him, and gave Clara a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Then he turned and walked out, a defeated man. The room was silent again, but this time it was a peaceful silence. Clara walked over to Javier, Maria, and Ben, who were still huddled together, trying to process the impossible turn their lives had just taken. "My aunt," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "Saw you. She really saw you. Thank you." Maria stood up and, without a word, pulled Clara into a fierce, tearful hug. "She was a good woman," Maria whispered in Spanish. "An angel." The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Ben Carter, now a millionaire, walked into Sterling Corp the next morning, submitted his resignation, and then, with a keystroke, sent his final email. It was addressed to the entire company. The subject line was simple: "In memory of Eleanor Vance." In the email, he described in clear, concise detail what had transpired at the will reading. He didn't embellish or editorialize. He simply stated the facts: the $50 million bequest, the condition of human decency, and the 3 people who had met the criteria. He finished by attaching a single, scanned page from Eleanor's ledger, the page detailing Marcus Thorne's habit of stealing credit from his subordinates. The email detonated like a bomb. The story was too juicy, too righteous to be contained. Within hours, it had been leaked to the press. By the end of the day, the janitor, the guard, and the millionaire analyst was a headline on a major news website. Sterling Corp's PR department went into crisis mode, but there was no spinning this. The story was a nightmare, a tale of corporate greed, heartlessness, and a brilliant, posthumous revenge. The company's stock took a noticeable dip. The CEO, whose own name had been on the debits list for his decades of neglect, was forced to issue a public apology. It rang hollow. An internal investigation was launched, but it was purely for show. The damage was done. Marcus Thorne was fired. The official reason was creating a toxic work environment, a charge substantiated by dozens of employees who, emboldened by the story, came forward with their own tales of his bullying and plagiarism. He was escorted from the building with his belongings in a box, a mirror image of Clara leaving with her aunt's things, but with none of the dignity. Brenda was fired the same day. Her reputation as a petty tyrant was legendary, and the company was all too happy to make her a scapegoat. She left in a storm of tears and threats, but no one was listening anymore. Clara, meanwhile, was busy. She and Alistair immediately began the work of establishing the Vance Foundation. The mission was clear: to provide grants and resources for initiatives that fought for workplace dignity, supported undervalued employees, and funded programs that taught corporate ethics. The remaining $47 million was its seed money. A week after the reading, Alistair gave Clara one last thing. It was another letter from Eleanor, this one for her alone. "My dearest Clara," it read, "if you are reading this, then our plan was a success. I hope it brought you a sense of justice, but I hope more than that, it brings you peace. I did not do this out of hatred for them, but out of love for the principle of the thing. A person's worth should not be determined by their salary or their title. It is measured in kindness, in integrity, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. You have the resources now to live any life you choose. My only advice is this: do not hide your light the way I did. My experiment was a lonely one. I chose to be a quiet observer, but you, my dear, are meant to be a voice. Let your light shine, and use it to expose the shadows. Live fully, love deeply, and never ever let anyone make you feel small. Your loving aunt, Eleanor. Clara folded the letter, tears of gratitude and love blurring her vision. Her aunt had given her more than just money. She had given her a mission. She would not be a quiet observer. She would be a voice. 1 year later, Clara stood at a podium in a brightly lit ballroom. The first annual Vance Foundation Gala was a resounding success. The room was filled with journalists, activists, and leaders from companies that were genuinely trying to create better workplaces. The foundation had already funded a dozen groundbreaking projects, including a legal aid service for victims of workplace harassment and a scholarship for low-income students pursuing degrees in business ethics. Clara was no longer the timid woman who had clutched a cardboard box in a sterile lobby. She was poised, articulate, and passionate. She spoke about her aunt's legacy, not as a story of revenge, but as a story of value. She spoke of the quiet dignity of the millions of Eleanors, Javiers, and Marias in the world, the people who formed the true backbone of every company, but were so often treated as invisible. My aunt's ledger was not just an accounting of slights, Clara told the rapt audience. It was a testament to a powerful truth, that our true character is revealed in how we treat those we believe have nothing to offer us. The smallest act of kindness can be a life-changing investment, and the smallest act of cruelty can be a debt that will one day come due. After her speech, she was surrounded by well-wishers. One of them was a kind-faced man named David, a high school history teacher who was volunteering at the event. He didn't talk about the money or the foundation's influence. He talked about her speech, about the way she spoke about her aunt. He saw her, the real her, just as her aunt had seen the good in Javier, Maria, and Ben. They talked for hours. It was the beginning of something new, something genuine. From time to time, she would get updates on the people from Sterling Corp. The company had undergone a massive restructuring, but its reputation was still tarnished. Marcus Thorne had tried to sue the estate, a pathetic, desperate legal battle that was swiftly dismissed by a judge who called his claim frivolous and, frankly, insulting. He was now unemployable in the corporate world. The last Ben had heard, Marcus was selling used cars at a dealership in the suburbs, his expensive suits replaced by a cheap polo shirt, his arrogant swagger gone. Brenda had fared no better. Her social climbing had depended on her proximity to power and money. Stripped of her job, she found her friends quickly vanished. She moved back in with her parents, her dreams of a BMW convertible turned to dust. She spent her days consumed by a bitter resentment that soured her features and her soul. Clara never reveled in their downfall. In a moment of compassion her aunt would have appreciated, she had the foundation anonymously send a check to a debt counseling service in Marcus's name. It was a small mercy, a sign that she would not be defined by their bitterness. Her focus was on the future, on building something positive from the wreckage of their cruelty. Javier had retired, buying a small house near his grandchildren, his days filled with fishing and family. Maria had used her money to put her daughter through medical school and had started her own small, successful catering business, her food infused with the same warmth and generosity she had once shown a lonely woman in an office break room. Ben Carter had left the corporate world entirely. He co-founded a tech startup focused on creating ethical software, a company where every employee, from the CEO to the janitor, was treated with respect, a company Eleanor would have loved. Late that night, after the gala, Clara stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the cardboard box, so light with her aunt's few possessions, and the heavy, leather-bound ledger that had outweighed it 1,000,000 times over. Her aunt had been right. People show you who they are when they think you have nothing. Eleanor Vance's greatest gift wasn't the fortune she left behind, but the lesson she had taught the world. It was a lesson in seeing, in valuing, and in understanding that true wealth has nothing to do with the zeros in a bank account and everything to do with the content of one's character. She felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet fulfillment that was the true inheritance. She was living the life she was meant to live, and she was doing it in the light.